Tonight on Bridge City News, RCMP have suspended the search for a man who's been missing from Lethbridge since November 17th. Lethbridge police are investigating the stabbing of a 16-year-old who's recovering in a Calgary hospital following a vicious attack. And the UCP government is investing $8 million to help those recovering from opioid addiction.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Robbins.
Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. The RCMP have suspended their search for a man who has been missing from Lethbridge since November 17th. 26-year-old Marshall Awasa's burnt-out truck was found November 25th near Pemberton, British Columbia. He told his family that he was returning home to Calgary, but no one has seen or heard from him since. Many items belonging to Awasa were found in the truck, and discarded clothing was located by a creek. Police said the search has been put on hold until they can get more leads. The investigation will continue. The Find Marshall Awasa Facebook group now has 5,300 members, with many saying they have shared the poster in their community. His family is comforted in knowing how many people are posting his photo and sharing updates as they come in. Lethbridge police are investigating an incident involving a 16-year-old male who was stabbed on Thursday night. Police responded to the assault in an alley along the 200 block on Mayor McGrath Drive North. Upon arriving, police saw a young man who had been stabbed. He was transported to Chinook Hospital and later transferred to a Calgary hospital with serious injuries. He's currently listed in stable condition. Police were able to obtain video surveillance, which led to the arrests of 8 people. Authorities believe this was not a random crime and that the parties knew each other. Police are also investigating an assault which occurred yesterday morning around 8:30 a.m. along the 200 block of 5th Street South. Police say a 37-year-old man was attacked with injuries sustained to his head. He was transported to hospital where he remains in stable condition. Upon further investigation, a suspect was later identified and arrested in the northern part of the city. Police are asking for assistance in their investigation. If you can help out, please give them a call at 403-328-4444. The Alberta Court of Appeal has dismissed a request for a new trial from a man convicted of killing a Calgary couple and their grandson. Douglas Garland's lawyers say evidence found at his client's farm should never have been allowed at the trial. Garland is serving a life sentence with no chance of parole for 75 years for the murders of Alvin and Kathy Lickness and 5-year-old Nathan O'Brien. Their bodies were never found, but bone fragments and teeth were found in ash from a burning barrel on Garland's property. The Alberta government is providing new funding to increase psychosocial support for people recovering from opioid addiction. The $8 million over the next 4 years will increase patient access to supports, including addiction counselors and therapists at opioid dependency clinics. There are currently 10 AHS clinics in the province which provide therapy. The Associate Minister of Mental Health and Addictions, Jason Lewan, had this to say earlier in a press release. We are investing the entire range of addiction treatment and recovery services to provide more Albertans the opportunity to get on the path to health, wellness, and long-term recovery. The 2019 UCP budget includes $140 million over the next 4 years to increase access to mental health and addiction treatment, along with creating an addiction strategy. As climate battles continue between Alberta and Ottawa, the feds have given our province a passing grade for its industrial carbon tax. Environment Minister Jonathan Wilkinson says Alberta's planned $30 per tonne carbon price on emissions from big industry meets federal requirements. Beginning January 1st, Ottawa will begin applying its carbon tax here in Alberta to the purchase of things like gasoline, natural gas, and propane. Ontario Premier Doug Ford defended his government's climate plan in the face of criticism that the province will fall short of its 2030 goal for emissions reductions. Ford argued that his province is on track to meet its targets.
On the environmental side, I'm very confident we have a great plan. We're going to hit our targets by 2030. We're one of the leading provinces in the country with 22.5% reductions. But we have to start looking at technology. We're investing $28.5 billion infrastructure transit project in Toronto. We're going to bring tens of thousands of cars off the street, similar to the great LRT headed up by the mayor here. If we can get more public transit, that gets people out of the cars, and we look forward to getting the whole transit system, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, up and going here in Ottawa.
The Canadian Red Cross will be the beneficiary thanks to a fundraising concert being put on by 3 Lethbridge middle schools. As Loris Alexander explains, this is one unique rock show you won't want to miss.
1, 2, 3, 4. On December 17th, GS Lakey, Gilbert, Patterson, and Wilson Middle Schools will co-host Rockin' for the Red Cross.
We decided to do a fundraiser concert for the Red Cross around Christmas time, and I had the idea where I can incorporate my school, because we have a popular music program where we have guitar classes, rock band classes, and computer music technology classes, where we could combine with other middle schools that are also trying to get these type of programs going.
The goal of the event is to not only raise money for the Red Cross, but also promote popular music education classes in the division at the middle school level.
For the first time ever, got to collaborate between all three middle schools, or three of our middle schools in Lethbridge 51. We've got GS Lakey, where the event is being held. We've got Gilbert Patterson, and then Wilson Middle School. So we've got bands from all of the schools performing, just showing off our unique programs and just how great it is and coming together through music.
The teachers are hoping for an audience of approximately 250 to 300 people.
The Red Cross is an organization that will donate anything that you come to them for free. So if you need a wheelchair or whatever it may be, they're just going to give you that service, right? So they need to raise money through things like this.
Tickets are $5 at the door or online via School Cash Online. For Bridge City News, I'm Loris Alexander.
The 13th annual Christmas Hope campaign has begun in Lethbridge. 5 community agencies, including the Interfaith Food Bank, Lethbridge Family Services Angel Tree, and the Salvation Army, have joined forces to help provide for those in need. The group plans to serve 2,000 adults and 4,000 children during the Christmas season.
We are partnering with Interfaith Food Bank, Lethbridge Food Bank, Lethbridge Family Services Angel Tree, Salvation Army Toys for Tots, and the My City Care Shop of Wonders to make sure that every family gets exactly what they need at Christmas. This time of year is so busy for all of us, and so it makes us remind ourselves of how much harder it must be for a family who is struggling a little bit financially, but our community always comes through.
We receive referrals from 85 schools, agencies, nonprofits, and child and family services, and out of those referrals we have 2,500 children and youth that are in need of gifts this Christmas. We are in need of a few more volunteers and toys for children, both boys and girls, between 9 and 13 years old.
So this is an example of our medium-sized hamper. So it's 2 to 3 people per household, and it entails our December hamper plus that extra Christmas meal. We need the support of our community to be able to make these hampers. So in the month of November, we actually pre-made a lot of our hampers and snack packs. So this is an example of our snack pack that each household will also receive. We pre-planned to serve 800 households, so that's approximately 1,600 individuals.
Last year, close to 1,500 households were provided with food hampers, and more than 3,600 kids received toys through the Christmas Hope Initiative. There's a way for faith and science to coexist. Now, that's according to Dr. Andy Walsh, author of the book Faith Across the Multiverse, Parables for Modern Science. Dr. Walsh says when you combine science and faith, people can be led to Christ.
In this book in particular is to use the language and the concepts of contemporary science to talk about Christian theology, to talk about ideas from the Bible, as a way to maybe introduce those to folks who aren't familiar with the Bible or haven't had the opportunity to read it for themselves.
Catch the full interview with Dr. Walsh discussing how faith and science can coexist. That's coming up in the second half of our show. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau officially launched his second mandate and a new era of a Liberal minority government. The throne speech highlighted a need for all parties to work together. The speech from the throne, read by Governor General Julie Payette, appealed to the opposition parties to help make the new minority parliament work.
The government has heard Canadians' concern that the world is increasingly uncertain and that the economy is changing. And in this context, regional needs and differences really matter. Today's regional economic concerns are both justified and important. The government will work with provinces, territories, municipalities, Indigenous groups, stakeholders, industry, and Canadians to find solutions.
The first question period following the federal election saw PM Justin Trudeau and Tory leader Andrew Scheer clash over our country's latest job numbers and how much the blame the Liberals should take for it.
Under this Prime Minister, foreign investors are rushing for the exits. Foreign direct investment is down 56%. 10% on his watch. And today's job losses are the worst since the 2008 financial crisis. So again, with all signs pointing to an economic downturn, why did this Prime Minister fail to mention any of that in his speech from the throne?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister. From the throne, we recognize the challenges facing workers in our resource sector with the lower prices on international commodities. There have been some very difficult times for workers, particularly in the prairies. That is why, after many years of trying and failing by previous governments, we are moving forward on building the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion. There are shovels in the ground. There are thousands of Canadians newly hired to make sure that we can get our energy resources to new markets responsibly and sustainably.
30 years after a misogynist with a gun killed 14 female engineering students at Montreal's École Polytechnique, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and opposition leaders spoke about the massacre and its legacy.
It is more than time for change. It is more than time to put an end to gender-based violence, including the national tragedy of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Because it is more than time to build a country where everyone is safe and where everyone's rights are respected and realized. Mr. Speaker, to find the way forward, we need only look around.
14 smart young women filled with ambitions. They had a promising future. They had their whole life ahead of them. They deserved to have their whole life ahead of them. And those young women could never have guessed that a man's cruelty was about to rob them of what was most precious to them, their lives. On December 16th at the Polytechnic, in an unthinkable act of hatred and spite, he separated the men and the women and then began to shoot the women, murdering 14 and wounding many others. The names of those killed deserve to be read and honored.
It's still horrific to think of these deaths. How young the women were and how much promise their lives held. But what continues to hit me today is how ordinary violence and the message it sends to women is. We need to stop putting the responsibility of being safe on women and girls and start putting that responsibility of respecting women on men.
In spite of being involved in a sex scandal, Prince Andrew is still commander of 3 Canadian Forces units. Our parliamentary reporter Ray Fillion has the details.
He's been publicly accused by some people of forcing a 17-year-old girl to have sex with him. She was underage at the time. She recounted that story in a dramatic interview with the BBC earlier this week. As you probably know, you might have heard that many charities, including a high school he used to attend here in Ontario, have cut ties with the embattled prince. But in spite of that, you're right. He still remains commander-in-chief of 3 Canadian Forces units. We're talking here about the Queen's York Rangers, the Royal Highland Fusiliers of Canada, and the Princess Louise's Fusiliers.
Coming up in the second half of our show, Ray will also have details of how Conservative leader Andrew Scheer is trying to shore up support for his leadership. Disgraced Hollywood mogul Harvey Weinstein arrived at a New York City courtroom earlier today for a pretrial hearing in his rape and sexual assault case. Weinstein, who is free on a $1 million bail, is due to stand trial next month on 5 sexual assault charges. He has denied all of them and has repeatedly tried to have the case thrown out. There are some powerful and engaging new movies playing at the Mill this weekend, including Maleficent, starring Angelina Jolie. With more, here's another Movie Mill Minute.
Harriet. Based on the thrilling and inspirational life of Harriet Tubman, this motion picture tells the extraordinary tale of her escape from slavery and transformation into one of America's greatest heroes. Her courage, ingenuity, and tenacity freed hundreds of slaves and changed the course of history.
Do you know what would happen if you got caught? You got lucky, Harriet.
I made it this far on my own. So don't you tell me what I can't do.
The Good Liar. Career con artist Roy Courtney can hardly believe his luck when he meets well-to-do widow Betty McLeish online. As Betty opens her life and home to him, Roy is surprised to find himself caring about her. turning what should be a cut-and-dry swindle into the most treacherous tightrope walk of his life.
Do you know who you are? You're the only person on this planet who makes me feel that I'm not alone.
It's the adrenaline rush.
Seems like you've had quite a past.
Enough to last several lifetimes.
When an invading army threatens Maleficent's picturesque life in a forest kingdom, she rises up to become its fiercest protector. However, a terrible betrayal hardens her heart and twists her into a creature bent on revenge, realizing only later that her child Aurora holds the key to peace in the kingdom.
Godmother! This isn't you. You do not know me.
Looks like some great movies at the mill once again. You know, it was so nice to see the fog finally lift in many parts of southwestern Alberta, but some snow is on the way. Complete weather details are coming up. Many regions across southwestern Alberta were quite foggy for a lot of the day today. Tonight, just a few clouds developing with a low near 3. Tomorrow, the snow returns mixed with rain, and we should see a high near 7 degrees. Sunday, more snow on the way with the mercury dropping to -7. Monday, the flurry should taper off, and we should get up to 2 degrees. Tuesday, a mixture of sun and cloud and a high of 4. Wednesday, mainly sunny with a high near 5 degrees. Thursday, warming up to 9 degrees under a mainly cloudy sky. Checking the almanac, the average high for this time of year is +1 and an average low of -11. The highest temperature in the state was recorded in 1987 at 16 degrees, and the record low, a very chilly -34 in 1956. Sunrise was at 8:13, sunset at 4:32. Let's see how tomorrow's shaping up across the country now. There's a good chance of rain and 10 degrees for Victoria, BC, showers and 10 as well for Vancouver. Snow and -4 for Calgary on Saturday. Snow and -7 for Edmonton. Expect light snow and 0 for Regina. Flurries and -4 for Saskatoon. Winnipeg will also have snow and should see a high of -4. Chance of flurries and -2 for Toronto tomorrow. A mixture of sun and cloud and -5 for Ottawa. Expect an overcast day and -6 degrees for Montreal. Over the Maritimes, just a few clouds and -4 for Fredericton, New Brunswick. Light snow and -2 in Halifax, Nova Scotia. -4 and snow in Charlottetown, PEI. And in St. John's, Newfoundland, expect snow mixed with rain and a high near +1 for tomorrow. The Water Tower Grill in Lethbridge closed about 2 months ago, but the historic building it used to operate in did not sit without a tenant for very long. A new restaurant is slated to open on January 2nd.
The interesting story of me and Water Tower test is when I came to Canada, I replaced the gentleman who left the job to come to the Water Tower. So I always tell the people if there was no Water Tower, I would not be here in Canada. And that's how I was always connected with the Water Tower. And 2 years later, when I got permanent residency, I moved to Picture Butte, bought a hotel. It was an old hotel. It's still an old hotel. We renovated and ran a restaurants. And we think we did it pretty well there. And then 2 years later, the other business came in on sale. It's called Telegraph Tap House. It's a beautiful Belgian-style pub, and I love it. I love it in the first sight. So we bought that one, and then after 2 years now, when this place came on, I say, yeah, that's the place brought me in Canada. I should involve there, and I just got up, and that's why we are here.
Alberta, British Columbia, and Quebec saw the biggest job losses last month. Now that's according to Stats Canada. Overall, the Canadian economy lost 71,200 jobs last month, and the unemployment rate rose to just under 6%. More than 45,000 of those jobs were lost in Quebec due to a decline in manufacturing, accommodation, and food services in the province. Economists say the numbers throw into question the Bank of Canada's claims about the resiliency of the economy that led it to keep its key interest rate on hold earlier this week. Now, speaking of the Bank of Canada, its Governor Stephen Poloz will not be seeking a second term. His 7-year reign will expire on June 2nd of next year. Poloz became the head of Canada's Central Bank in 2013. Prior to that, he was the chief executive of Export Development Canada. The board of directors of the central bank says it has begun a search to find his replacement. You may be hesitant to add another item to your already busy Christmas to-do list. Financial experts say you should not neglect your financial plan in the year-end rush. A financial planner with RBC says doing a little year-end housekeeping can be helpful come tax time in April.
I find the mistake that many Canadians make is they don't think about taxes until April, and by that time it's too late to take advantage of some of the opportunities that are out there. So doing a little year-end housekeeping to get your financial house in order is exactly the way to do it. Usually anything you want to do comes under what most tax reduction strategies come under, and it's what we always call the 3 Ds. And what that stands for is deduct, defer, and divide. And they're just the 3 main techniques of trying to reduce your income and keep more in your pocket and pay less to the government. Yeah, deduct is the one that people mostly think of when they think of year end, because there are certain expenses that need to be incurred before December 31st in order to be eligible for your 2019 tax year. So the most obvious one would be charitable donations. Anything has to be done by December 31st, and of course we know that's a tax deduction. So this is something we have to look at as a strategy to do sooner rather than later. So what defer really refers to is just putting off taxes to tomorrow instead of today. We'd all rather pay $1 in tax 5 years from now than today. So some of the most common strategies for deferring tax are things like some of the investment accounts that people are familiar with, like RSPs, tax-free savings accounts, education savings plans, or disability savings plans. The RSP deadline isn't until 60 days after year end, but nonetheless, the sooner you get it in there, the sooner it starts growing and the better, and it is one of our best ways to defer taxes into the future. Yeah, and so divide really involves, trying to move income from not just one person, but into usually a spouse, but somebody else. What you're looking at is so the tax brackets in Canada are such that as you start to get up into higher income, you pay a lot more tax. It's a very progressive system. So the more we can spread income between more than one person, the more we're going to keep you into lower tax brackets.
Now, here's a look at today's markets.
The TSX was up 142 points today to 16,997. The Dow was up 337 points to 28,015. The S&P 500 was up almost 28 points to 3,145, and the Nasdaq was up close to 86 points on the day to 8,656. Oil was up 77 cents to $59.20 per barrel. Natural gas was down 9 cents to $2.33. Gold was down $15.89 to $1,460.16 per ounce. Silver was down 39 cents to $16.58 an ounce. Wheat is at $227 per metric ton. Barley is at $230. Canola is at $456 per metric ton. And corn is at $276 per metric ton. Live cattle were up 28 cents to $120.48. Feeder cattle were up $1 to $141.95. Lean hogs were down 45 cents to $62.53. And the Canadian dollar was down slightly to 0.7544 cents US.
Recapping one of our top stories this hour, the RCMP have suspended their search for a man who's been missing from Lethbridge since November the 17th. 26-year-old Marshall Awas's burnt-out truck was found November 25th near Pemberton, British Columbia. He told his family that he was returning home to Calgary, but no one has seen or heard from him since. Many items belonging to Awasa were found in the truck, and discarded clothing was located by a creek. Police say the search has been put on hold until they can get more leads. The investigation will continue. Some good news for our energy sector, in that construction is supposed to finally begin on the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion. Our parliamentary reporter Ray Fillion has details next. But first, here's a look what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News community calendar. Come for great musical entertainment to a country Christmas featuring musical artists Alyssa McQuaid, Cody Hall, Eric Braun, Amy Allred, and more. Taking place Sunday, December 15th from 2 to 3:30 p.m. at the Gem of the West Museum in Coaldale. Tickets are $15 each. Kids under 10 can enter for free. To purchase your tickets, visit amyallred.com. Make Christmas special for a child in need. Center Village Mall Toy Mountain is accepting donations of new unwrapped toys until December 20th during mall hours. All toys will be distributed through the joint efforts of the Christmas Hope campaign. For details, visit christmashope.ca. An annual City Hall tradition continues with the Sounds of the Season concert series. Enjoy your favorite holiday classics performed by various local choirs and bands during the weeks leading up to Christmas. For more information and performance times, visit lethbridge.ca. And that's your Bridge City News community calendar.
Yesterday was a pretty big day in Ottawa as Parliament reconvened. Joining me now to talk about it is our parliamentary reporter, Ray Fillion. Ray, Governor General Julie Payette read the prepared text of the throne speech, and a lot of it discussed tax breaks for middle-income Canadians, plus a focus on gun control and climate change.
Exactly. Pretty much what the Liberals talked about during most of the election campaign we had earlier this fall. A lot of pomp and circumstance for this grandiose event on Parliament Hill. As you know, the Senate is now in a building of its own, pending renovation work that's going to last the better part of the next decade on Parliament Hill. So, yeah, no surprises, no poison pills in that speech from the throne, which is really going to be one of the first tests of confidence for the new minority Liberal government. Climate change, healthcare, gun control, First Nations. The speech also confirms that the government's priority will be the promised tax cut, making the first $15,000 you earn per year tax-free. Right now, it's the first $12,000, $400 you don't pay tax on. So no surprises. There was only a brief mention, and this is something that people out west and the Conservatives noted, only a very brief mention of natural resources in that speech from the throne. And it was this, I have the text right here. While the government takes strong action to fight climate change, it will also work just as hard to get Canadian resources to new markets and offer unwavering support to the hardworking women and men in Canada's natural resources sector, many of whom have faced tough times recently. The Tories and the New Democrats say that's not enough. They want more. They haven't said that they're going to be voting against the speech from the throne. However, the government is safe because the Bloc Québécois announced immediately that they're going to be supporting it. According to their leader, Yves-François Blanchet, there's enough in that speech from the throne that they can live with.
So the Liberals are saying they want to support our energy sector, natural resources, getting it to market. Does that mean they're going to turf C-69 and C-48? That's what we want to know here in Alberta.
They're not going that far, and I don't think it's going to happen either.
Okay. Now, the MPs chose their speaker. Ray, who's the lucky candidate?
Anthony Rota, an MP from Northern Ontario, who's been around for a while. He was first elected back in 2004, although he lost his election in 2011. He came back in 2015. He was one of 5 candidates. There was one from Quebec, 2 from Ontario, and Jeff Reagan, the outgoing speaker, who is running again. He's from Nova Scotia. But most of his colleagues decided to go for his Liberal colleague, Mr. Rota, who noted with emotion during his speech that he's the first Canadian of Italian descent to become Speaker of the House of Commons here in the nation's capital. He almost choked up saying that. He also spoke a little bit of Italian during his speech. This is a job, as we said before, that comes with some big responsibilities. You have to maintain decorum, and it's especially hard in a minority parliament. But it also comes with some interesting perks: an official residence in the Gatineau Hills, not too far from Ottawa, an official apartment on Parliament Hill, and an $85,000 a year bonus on top of your MP salary, which amounts to $264,000 a year. So not bad. Anthony Rota, you're going to hear a lot about this guy over the coming years.
$284,000, Italian descent, first speaker of Italian. Free gelato for everyone. That's what I say, right? Free gelato on the hill. Now, Ray, a lot of talk around the water coolers is how U.S. President Donald Trump called Prime Minister Justin Trudeau two-faced. But you know, Trump wasn't the only one. NDP leader Jagmeet Singh also says there are 2 Trudeaus, one we see in public and the other one in private.
Yeah, a lot was said about that video, that candid moment that was seen around the world. And Joe Biden, I don't know if you saw the commercial that was aired on social media on Wednesday evening. Joe Biden is actually using that footage to tell Americans, look, people around the world are making fun of our president. So CNN reported on Thursday that Donald Trump was actually enraged when he first saw the footage, which was, of course, aired profusely on Fox News Network, his favorite news channel. Listen, it remains to be seen how bad it's going to make Canada look on the international stage, whether or not it's going to have some negative repercussions for Canada in the United States and its all too important relationship with Washington. But I think it's bad for Mr. Trudeau for 2 reasons. Number one, it undermines his entire government strategy, which ever since Donald Trump became U.S. president a few years ago was to never say anything negative about the American president. Bite your tongue, bide your time. He's going to lash out at you. Don't respond. That's always been the strategy. And it worked. When you look at the dividends it paid in the USMCA renegotiation, the whole NAFTA thing, So Mr. Trudeau didn't live up to that pledge that he made when Donald Trump became American president. The other reason I think where it hurts Mr. Trudeau is that many people have accused the Prime Minister of being a phony. And here you have Justin Trudeau playing nice when he's in front of the cameras with the American president and making fun of him behind the scenes. Although this is not really surprising what happened, I'm sure every single world leader who's had to rub shoulders with the American president has behaved the way Mr. Trudeau did at Buckingham Palace when he was caught by that TV camera and that microphone. Hey, did you see what Donald Trump did? Did you hear what he said? Can you believe that? The only difference is Mr. Trudeau was caught and for the whole world to see. So it kind of looks bad.
Maybe somebody needs to speak to our Prime Minister about being camera aware. You know, where the cameras are at all times. You have to be concerned about that, right?
Yeah, somebody in PMO told me the day after the incident, what was a camera doing there? It was a private reception. Well, when you're on the international stage, when you're a prime minister of a country, when you're Justin Trudeau, there's pretty much always a camera. You have to watch yourself.
Now, our PM had an uncomfortable moment when Trump told him that Canada needs to spend a little bit more money when it comes to our support of NATO.
Yeah, we talked about this week. The president of the United States has been calling recently in the last couple of years on other NATO nations to live up to their pledge, which is to spend 2% of their budget on the equivalent of 2% of their GDP on the military. Canada is nowhere near that, although it's doing better than many other countries. And the American president, during the news conference that he had with Justin Trudeau, he asked him point blank, "What's your number?" And the funny thing is, Prime Minister Trudeau answered the American president the way he answers us journalists when we ask him a direct question most of the time, is that he doesn't answer the question directly. He started by talking about the improvements, the extra money that Canada has been spending on the military in the past couple of years, the extra money it intends to spend in the coming years. And at that point, the American president kind of looked puzzled, and he asked the question again, "So what's your number, Prime Minister?" And that's when Justin Trudeau turned to his aides, because he didn't know the numbers, surprisingly. He said, "Where are we at?" He was given the figure 1.3% of Canada's GDP. And Mr. Trudeau turned to President Trump and said 1.4. The actual number is apparently, I'm told, 1.31.
Right.
And Mr. Trudeau told Donald Trump it's 1.4. Mr. Trump called Canada slightly delinquent, I would say, but they'll be okay. I have confidence. Some other countries, said Donald Trump, are major delinquents. So I'm sure it's not a trip Justin Trudeau will remember fondly. That's the least we can
Maybe it's 1.31 Canadian or US and then 1.4 US. I don't know.
Maybe.
Federal Tory leader Andrew Scheer is continuing his efforts to shore up support for his leadership. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, he released a video. He published a video on social media this week that was actually recorded by one of his supporters, Conservative Senator Denise Bathurst. She recounted what happened back in 2004 after Stephen Harper, who was then leader of the newly united Conservative Party, lost that election to Paul Martin's Liberals. And you know, she reminds everyone that back then a lot of people were calling on Mr. Harper to resign because he had failed to beat the Liberals. He decided to stick around, and he won the ensuing election in January 2006. So that's the story she tells in that video. Although things look really bad right now, I must say, for Mr. Scheer's leadership. There was a Leger poll conducted across Canada in the last couple of weeks that showed only 48%, less than half of Conservative supporters say he should stay on as leader. Just to compare, 87% of NDP supporters think Mr. Singh should stick around, should stay on as leader of the NDP. Overall, across Canada, 53% of respondents believe Mr. Scheer should quit as Tory leader. Only 24% said he should stay on. He got a standing ovation at a caucus meeting from his MPs and senators here on Parliament Hill the day before Parliament reconvened on Wednesday. But, you know, I remember Stéphane Dion getting standing ovations, Michael Ignatieff, and Tom Mulcair, and we know what happened next. They all lost their jobs. So he's in a very tough spot right now. I would say his leadership, it looks to me like it's hanging by a thread.
Ray, Huawei issued a recent statement on the one-year anniversary of the arrest of Meng Wanzhou in Canada. What were some of the details?
Meng Wanzhou, who wrote a 3-page letter to thank her supporters here in Canada and across the world. It's a 3-page letter titled, "Your warmth is a beacon that lights my way forward." She writes, "The past year has witnessed moments of fear, pain, disappointment, helplessness, torment, and struggle." She says that when she was in China, days would go by very quickly. And now it seems, she writes, that time passes very slowly. It is so slow, she writes, that I have enough time to read a book from cover to cover. I can take the time to discuss minutiae with my colleagues or to carefully complete an oil painting. She's under house arrest in Vancouver in her mansion.
Yes.
So she's not in jail. Now compare that with what the two Canadians, Michael Spavor and Michael Kovrig, have been going through for nearly a year. They've been detained in a jail in China. One of them has had his reading glasses confiscated, so he can't read a book from cover to cover like she can. We're told also that their detention conditions are pretty bad. The lights in their cells are on apparently 24/7. So when you compare her sob story with what they're going through in China, there's a world of difference. I don't think she's getting a lot of sympathy from the Canadian government, certainly not from most Canadians who read that 3-page letter. And meanwhile, there was an interesting comment this week. Former Liberal Cabinet Minister John Manley is suggesting a prisoner swap between Canada and China. I don't think it's going to go anywhere personally. I don't think that Canada is interested in that, but we'll see.
Ray, in spite of a huge controversy he's embroiled in, Prince Andrew is still commander of 3 Canadian Forces units.
Yeah, that's right. As you know, he's been publicly accused by some people of forcing a 17-year-old girl to have sex with him. She was underage at the time. She recounted that story in a dramatic interview with the BBC earlier this week. As you probably know, you might have heard that many charities, including a high school he used to attend here in Ontario, have cut ties with the embattled prince. But in spite of that, you're right. He still remains commander-in-chief of 3 Canadian Forces units. We're talking here about the Queen's York Rangers, the Royal Highland Fusiliers of Canada, and the Princess Louise's Fusiliers. We asked the Prime Minister's office for comment this week. They wouldn't say anything. They referred us to the Minister of National Defense, who in turn referred us to the Department of National Defense. Nobody wanted to comment. The only person who commented in the political sphere was Jagmeet Singh, the leader of the NDP. He publicly called on Prince Andrew to quit his responsibilities as commander-in-chief of those 3 Canadian battalions, but it's very complicated. In order for that to happen, we're told the Prime Minister would have to ask the Queen to get him to resign. And of course, when it comes to the monarchy, she's the head of state. It's a very delicate matter.
Big news for Albertans in that construction of the TMX expansion will finally begin. Or will it, Ray? Will we see more court challenges and delays?
Yeah, that remains to be seen. We don't know about court challenges. Anything can happen. Some groups are still upset, as you know, with the federal government. They're still fighting it out in court. So we'll see what happens with that. But in the meantime, the new Minister of Natural Resources, Seamus O'Regan, who was there for the official launch of the construction of that much-awaited expansion, called it a good day for Alberta, a good day for Canada. He said that the pipelines are going to go into the ground before Christmas, and it's going to take roughly 3 years to complete the work. So, yeah, a lot of people in Alberta are keeping their fingers crossed.
Absolutely. We definitely need that to help turn our economy around here. Our parliamentary reporter, Ray Fillion, joining me once again from Ottawa. Thanks so much, Ray.
You bet, Hal.
It seems much of the Western world turns to science for answers rather than to faith. But can faith and science coexist, get along with each other? Today's guest has some ideas on the subject. Dr. Andy Walsh is a molecular biologist and author of Faith Across the Multiverse, Parables from Modern Science. Andy, welcome to Bridge City News.
Hi, thanks for having me, Hal.
Now you say that you hope the book will introduce readers to God and that science can actually coexist, and maybe science can help in the process. How so?
Yeah, so the idea in this book in particular is to use the language and the concepts of contemporary science to talk about Christian theology, to talk about ideas from the Bible, as a way to maybe introduce those to folks who aren't familiar with the Bible or aren't haven't had the opportunity to read it for themselves, and even for Christians who might be familiar to talk about these things that in a new way, to maybe help them think about things like God's grace. Or the nature of Jesus and his divine and human nature, things like that, in a new way by using new language and new metaphors for them.
Now, you make quite an interesting statement as well. You do not have faith in religion. Can you explain that?
Sure. So it's not that my faith in the practice of Christianity or the traditions of Christianity so much as faith in the person of Jesus Christ for ultimate salvation. Right, so that's who I'm ultimately interested in following, and who I'm ultimately interested in introducing other people to is Jesus of Nazareth, and the God that I believe that He incarnated and who we meet through the Bible. And so the Bible is a good way to get to know the person of Jesus, but that ultimately He's the one that we're trying to get to know better.
Now, you're right that your belief in God is informed by historical corroboration of the Bible. Can you give an example or two?
Sure. So we have, archaeological evidence of different events in the Old Testament, various of the kings of Israel and Judah and so forth. Certainly, the captivity and the various empires that are mentioned in the Old Testament, match up with lots of other historical records. Then there's also, evidence of the life of Jesus of Nazareth himself from other sources outside of the Bible, and certainly other events that are mentioned in the Bible related to who was in charge, who was ruling for the Roman Empire and so forth at that time. So there are reasons to think that the texts were written by folks who lived during that era and were familiar with what was going on.
Why do you say the work of faith is to discern the meaning and what we observe in the world around us?
Okay, so one of the early chapters in the book talks about the concept of faith and relates it to mathematics and the mathematics of information and communication. And so communication and information theory is something studied in math, but we don't have so much a model for what a message means, so much as measuring the size of the message, or how much of a file size or how much of a bandwidth we need to communicate a particular message. Meaning is something different. It tends to be relational. It requires that both parties, the sender of the message and the receiver of the message, agree on some common meaning and some common way of interpreting that. And so as a Christian believer, our faith is part of our faith is accepting a common meaning with God, that God is trying to communicate some meaning through the Bible, and that we're trying to find that shared meaning with Him by entering into a relationship with Him and interpreting the Bible and interpreting the natural world as His creation in a way that is consistent with the meaning that He intends to communicate.
Now, you break your book into 4 different sections. What are they, and why did you choose them?
Yeah, so the 4 sections deal with the language of mathematics, with physics, with biology, and with computer science. And I chose them for a couple of reasons. First, those are the areas of science that I was most familiar with, partly through my formal academic training in biology and later in computer science, and also areas that I was just familiar with from having read a lot of books sort of as a side hobby. And I also felt that it was a helpful progression going from abstract ideas from mathematics through to more concrete ideas and encountering the actual physical world in physics and biology. And then computer science deals a lot with practical questions of how do we accomplish particular tasks.
Now, can you explain exactly what you mean by God calls us to balance justice and mercy, Andy?
Sure. So that's from another early chapter from the section on the language of math, dealing with how the concept of optimization can help us to understand things like sin and obedience. And so the question becomes, what are we trying to optimize? What are we trying to make the most of in the world? And it seems like 2 important such concepts are justice and mercy. So justice being the idea that fairness, that if somebody does something wrong, that there is some accountability for that, some sort of either punishment or reconciliation or restoration that needs to be accomplished. And also mercy, the idea that we show some leniency to people that have done something wrong, that we don't punish them to the full extent of the law or what have you. And so balancing those 2 things, we don't want there to be no justice in the world, but we also don't want there to be no mercy. And so finding some combination of those 2 things that is optimal seems to be what the Bible is calling us towards.
Why do you call a gracious universe one in which life is possible?
Okay, so that deals with the idea that chaos mathematics, the idea of things having sensitivity to their initial starting conditions, but also having some notion of being attracted to a particular stable pattern, not a particular stable point, but a dynamic stability, a pattern that recurs over time, that is an illustration of grace and God's grace. And we see a lot of systems in the actual world, both physical systems and biological systems, that exhibit this kind of chaotic attractor pattern, where dynamically the system will change over time, but it will tend to stay in a particular pattern that is stable. One example is our heartbeat, actually. The pattern of cells contracting, the nerve cells and the muscle cells working together exhibits that kind of behavior, where if one nerve cell or muscle cell gets a little bit out of sync, goes a little bit too early or too late, it'll tend back towards a synchronized setting so that your heart is pumping consistently and all those cells are working together to pump your blood, as opposed to getting out of sync and then just getting further and further out of sync and becoming completely disordered. So that tendency for the system to come back to a stable, ordered, consistent pattern is what makes life possible and is best modeled by this kind of chaos theory mathematics. And that's just one example of many where that kind of pattern of grace, that tendency of the system to come back to something stable, is exhibited in actual systems in nature. And so it seems to be a feature of the universe that does, in fact, make life possible on all different scales.
Now, you're right that the life of Jesus challenges our popular notions of what is significant or distinct about humanity. How so?
Sure. So, talking about Jesus, one of the things that we like to say a lot is that to err is human, right, and to forgive is divine. And I was thinking in particular when I wrote that of a movie in which that's kind of the rallying cry of the hero of the film, is that humans are going to make mistakes. Yet Jesus seems to live a perfect life, or at least that's part of Christian tradition, is that Jesus lives this perfect life, and yet is also fully human. So maybe that kind of capacity, we might have the capacity to make mistakes, but it's not necessarily a necessary part of the human condition, but simply an observed part of the human condition.
Living here in southern Alberta, Andy, we're very blessed because we can go hiking in the beautiful southern Rockies. I'm a big fan of that myself. How is the natural world a true signal from God?
Yeah, so as a Christian, we certainly believe that, I believe that God created the world and that it expresses some sort of his intentions for what he thinks is good and beautiful and worthwhile. And so the kinds of things that flourish over time in that creation are, I think, an indication of the things that are important to God. And so, we see in our experience that life flourishes, that love flourishes, that love is something that, is possible in the universe and that seems to grow over time, that the more you show love, the more the love there is in the world as opposed to diminishing. And, same with life. Life seems to be growing in abundance and in diversity over time. And so I think those things reflect the character of God and reflect the kinds of priorities that God has of what he would like to see more of.
Now, you say it's fairly easy to assess ourselves by what is going on around us, becoming a product of our environment. How do we get away from that tendency?
Yeah, so I think that that's part of the value of being involved in something like the Christian tradition and the Christian church, is having accountability to other people and having accountability to the examples in the Bible. So you have some sort of external reference that you're looking to for a model of what is ethical behavior, what is moral behavior, what is the good and true way to live.
Now, your book also has a chapter on the entropic principle. Can you explain exactly what that is?
Okay, sure. So entropy is a concept from physics, and it deals with it's often described as the tendency of things to tend towards disorder over time. But a slightly more helpful way of thinking about it is the balance between symmetry and asymmetry, so things becoming more symmetrical over time, meaning that you can swap around the parts and not tell the difference at a sort of large scale that you've made any sort of changes, that those little changes don't matter. So the more asymmetrical something is, the less entropy it has. And living systems, such as ourselves, show a high degree of asymmetry with respect to entropy. And so the entropic principle chapter talks about that we're called to be living sacrifices, that we're called to sort of set our lives down to follow Christ in behalf of other people. And so taking those things that make our lives asymmetrical and ordered and allow our own lives to proceed and sharing those with other people, maybe even taking on some amount of disorder or symmetry in our own lives so that we can share life with other people in big and small ways.
You talk about the idea of the Bible as a genome of the church. What do you mean by that?
Okay, so the genome is a concept from biology. We're talking about the sum total of the DNA sequences in all of our individual cells. Every cell in your body has a complete copy of your genome. They're all essentially identical, and they're all unique to you. But each cell has its own copy, and each cell is expressing that genome in different ways. So not every gene that genome encodes is expressed by every cell all the time, but they're expressing different genes at different times. That's what makes your different cell types in different parts of your body different. Similarly, the Bible is the full message of how the church, where the Christian tradition gets all of its doctrine from and ideas from, theology from. But no single person is expressing that entire Bible all at once. Even though we all have access to the same Bible, we're all referring to the same Bible, we're going to be expressing different parts of that Bible at different times in our own lives and corporately as different church communities. And so it kind of just has that same sort of function of informing what we do, but not being able to, but each person expressing it uniquely or bringing it to life uniquely. And so it's the sum total of the whole church over time that expresses the entirety of the Bible rather than any individual person at any given moment.
Now, Andy, when the Bible talks about man reflecting the true image of God, what does that mean? Does that mean that you and I look exactly like God, created in the image of our Heavenly Father?
Right. So in the Christian tradition, we don't think that God has a physical self in that same way. So it's not so much that we are physically resembling God, but more that we have been called to represent Him on earth as a ambassador. Some people use that word or something like that, and that there may be certain characteristics of how we live our lives or how we interact with each other that reflect God's principles or personality or priorities. And so, for example, we believe that God exists in a Trinity, and so there's some relational nature to God in and of Himself. And we see that same relational nature expressed in the church. That Christianity isn't fully expressed, as we just talked about in the genome concept. Christianity isn't fully expressed by any one person living their own life by themselves. Christianity and the Bible are fully expressed in a community of a church, and so that relational aspect of our Christian faith, it reflects some aspect of God and is an image of God, at least, if not the full expression of what we mean by the image of God.
Now, in your book, you refer to the Creator as a just-in-time God. Can you explain that?
Sure. So that just-in-time is a concept from computer science. It talks about how we take computer code that humans have written and translate it into machine instructions that a computer can actually execute. The first kinds of compilers did that all in advance. So you would write a computer program, and then you would send it to the computer to compile, and then you could run that program over and over again. More recently, we've developed systems where you can actually run a program as you're typing, as it's going along. You can execute each instruction individually. And then just-in-time compilation is a balance between the two, where you write the code in advance, but the computer is translating it into machine instructions as it goes, and translating different parts of it just when they're needed to be used. And so it's an efficient balance sort of between the two notions. And that kind of pattern seems to be something that we see in the Bible, where God is expressing intentions in advance, but the way that they are realized in particular circumstances sometimes are adjusted to account for the particulars of those circumstances, the choices that individual humans might make, and so forth. And so there's this balance between God having an intention that is expressed for all of time and how that intention is realized by the circumstances of individual lives. That seems to be conceptually kind of similar to that just-in-time idea.
Now, you write that simplifying the Ten Commandments were a way for God to provide order and information sharing. What do you mean by that?
Okay, so right there's a challenge of communication. A big part of the Bible is just for God to express Himself to us, to get across ideas that that we otherwise wouldn't know about him, right? We don't have direct experience of God. We don't have the same kinds of experiences God experienced because we have a different sort of body. We have a physical reality that's different from God's experience. And so God has to find ways to communicate across that experience gap to us. And things like the Ten Commandments represent different parts of God's communication and a way of expressing his intentions and his desire to know us and to be known by us.
Dr. Andy Walsh, a molecular biologist and author of Faith Across the Multiverse, Parables for Modern Science. Thanks for joining me today from Pennsylvania.
Sure, you're welcome. Thanks for having me, Hal.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless, and thanks so much for watching.